Coming up, rockets launch.
CubeSats deploy.
Fire in space.
And the drones are coming.
Plus, I'm going to let you know why your favorite orbiter is Atlantis. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins right now. And welcome to tomorrow, episode 8.34 for Saturday, November 21st, 2015. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham, and before we get into our space news, I did want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of tomorrow who helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are the people who've contributed $10 or more to this episode. A huge thank you to everyone because we are a crowdfunded show and every single dollar helps. You can find more information over at patreon.com/TMRO. And one of the things that crowdfunding dollars goes to are blackout curtains so that the sun, because now we're an hour earlier, the sun doesn't go through. You can see it like right there. We have one. We need like one more. We'll get that all fixed up. All right, let's go ahead. I am joined by, before we get into the news, I am joined by Jared. We've got Mike, myself, and my beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented wife, Carrie Ann.
Now my title is entirely too long. You're like, oh,
well, all right. The beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Jared, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Mike, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann. Let's go ahead and get started with some launch news. This happened. This is a Soyuz 2.1B rocket. Happened on November 17th, 6:34 Coordinated Universal Time footage. I'm just going to talk over it for the next 8 seconds or so because it takes that long for the rocket to actually lift off the pad. It does, right? So the engine's light, but unlike here, where you have like solids, you got like a 3-second buffer. Russia it's really like 8, I think it's 8 seconds when they light to actually committing to flight. So there you go. That was all we really got because this was a secret military payload. It's believed to be the first in the EKS class missile warning platform. Now, EKS is a Russian acronym that translates roughly to Integrated Space System. It's actually named Cosmos, KOMOS 2510, kind of sticking along with the rest of their naming convention. And this is actually, I mentioned early missile defense warning systems. They used to have a satellite constellation up there for missile defense and early warning systems, but it all like decayed and fell back down to Earth or got put into a parking orbit because it's just done, which meant that Russia's entire missile defense warning system is ground-based satellite, or ground-based radar, excuse me. So this is helping to bring them a space-based missile warning system back into play. They will have 10 of these satellites that'll be launched by 2018, helping them with their early warning network. And of course, because it's classified, that's about all the more information that we have on that. Speaking of classified and not having lots of information, China launched as well. They do.
I know.
Actually, what's interesting, interesting factoid, this was a reversal. Normally, we don't have very much footage from China. The Soyuz launch coverage, we had 32 seconds of footage. That's all we were able to find. But the Chinese launch coverage, we have 44 seconds of footage, and here it is.
That's a
44
record.
whole seconds, yeah. This happened Friday, November 20th at 16:07 Coordinated Universal Time. That is a Long March 3B, which is also known as hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, this is known as a Changzheng 3B. It is their largest, most powerful in the Long March, or CZ, platform. There you go. This was launching a geostationary communications satellite operated by Laos. It's actually known as LaoSat-1. There we go. LaoSat-1. And like I said, most powerful launch vehicle they have. It has a 3-stage rocket with 4 strap-on solid rocket motors. And it was going to be communications and video to the Asian country of Laos. And actually it has, that's what it is, has C and KU band transponders on it. So the C-band stuff is basically, think of it like broadcast television satellite. It can blow through clouds and storms and skies really easy. So it's really efficient to get through weather, but it's really inefficient from a bandwidth perspective. And it's also a KU band satellite, which is a much narrower, much higher range frequency, which means that you can get a lot more in it, so you can do a lot more channels, but when it starts to rain, it starts to suck and you get rain fade. So the KU band is generally to your home, so if you have like DirecTV, KU, KA, something in that band, and then C band would be those giant 8-foot or 10-foot or 12-foot dishes that you see in broadcast television stations, and that's what this satellite is doing. So there you go. All right, let's move it on over to you, Jared.
Yeah, we've got a very interesting experiment that's going to be coming up on one of the upcoming Cygnus missions orbital ATK.
We do?
Yeah, humanity does.
Yeah,
Oh, humanity. All right.
Humanity as a whole. So let's go ahead and take
space program.
Yeah, let's take a look at the footage of that, because it is a experiment that is going to be involving something that you typically don't want to have in space, which is fire. They're actually...
That sounds terrifying.
This experiment is called Sapphire, and it's going to be ran on orbitals 5, 6, and 7 upcoming missions on the Cygnus. And this is going to be conducted after undocking, but before the deorbit burn of our Cygnus.
So it will not be occurring while, like right there, you see it attached to the International Space Station. That
And
experiment
fire.
is not happening
Fire.
at that moment in
Fire.
time.
No, we just wouldn't recommend doing that
No.
that way. Now, it will burn about 1 square meter of materials, and it will determine those characteristics of fire in a microgravity environment. Because right now, the way that we experiment with fire in a microgravity environment is that we put the experiment at the top of a drop tower, and then we drop it, and for that like 9 or 10 seconds that it's falling, then we examine what the fire does. So it's very short duration, very small amounts of fuel as well for that fire. So in this case, we're going to be able to run it for a long time, and when we burn that material, we're going to see how it reacts in the microgravity environment and go from there. And hopefully we can understand how materials burn, so that way, if we do have to do a eventual putting out a fire on a spacecraft, worst case scenario, we'll have a good idea as to how to do that in the future.
And you've got a picture of fire in space as well.
Yeah,
right?
this is okay.
Well, not the one on the left. One on the left is...
Yeah, the one on the left is just a candle that you would regularly have here on Earth, and then the one on the right is essentially the same type of ignition source in microgravity. So fire tends to take a very spherical shape. Things will also burn at lower temperatures than you would expect in microgravity as well, compared with here on the Earth. And fire will propagate in different directions as well. So it kind of expands outwards as it does it. And of course, another bad thing about fire, besides the fact that it's damaging to equipment, it burns up your oxygen too. So that's not exactly a great thing as well. So this will be testing what exactly a fire does on a large scale inside of an environment.
So here's a dumb question. You said it burns at a lower temperature. Is that because of the microgravity or because of the lesser pressure on something like the space station? Or is that in the microgravity experiments where you have equal pressure?
They think that it has to do with the lesser pressure. Actually, part of the Sapphire experiment is going to be figuring out why things will ignite at lower temperatures than, say, here on Earth. Although the hypothesis currently is that because things are at lower pressure, it should make it a little bit easier for things to ignite.
Makes sense. All right, let's hand it on over to Space Mike. Space Mike, what have you got for us?
Well, hopefully nothing will be exploding with this, but this may set the small sat industry on fire. So
Oh,
this is
look at that.
Oh,
Well
segue.
done.
What this is United Launch Alliance announced this past week that they are going to have a rideshare program with every single Atlas V mission from here on out. And what they're going to have is CubeSat dispensers or deployers on every single mission. And with this, their goal is to have 24 CubeSats on every mission, and 6 of those, at least for 2 upcoming launches, would be free rides for university CubeSats. Let me say that again. Free rides for university CubeSats. This is a big deal, and in fact, they've even put out a request for universities to come up with a name for this program, and whatever university comes up with the name that they like, they're going to give that university a free CubeSat ride on one of the upcoming missions. So this is a really big deal. Not only is this a good launch opportunity program, but here in this video, they've actually been doing tests of this already on Atlas V launches. This is a recent launch where they were delivering a satellite for the National Reconnaissance Office, and you can see where the different right now we just saw payload fairings drop away, and in just a moment you're going to see hatches open on that box on the left there. There's one of the payload fairings right there, and they have deployed several CubeSats on different missions, and they have a couple of different ways of doing this. But in the different ways, they have what's called a P-pod, which is the Pico Polysat Orbital Deployer. And what that does is able to shoot out a 3-unit CubeSat. There you can see them deploying some right there. There's another one that gets shot out. And it can deploy either 3 1-unit CubeSats or 1 3-unit. And they have a couple of different ways of doing this. One of the ways that they have is called a C adapter platform. And that would go in between the Centaur upper stage and the primary payload. And that would have several different racks attached around this ring where they would be able to deploy these different CubeSats from. I do believe that we have a picture of that so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. But with that, they would have 3 to 6, right here is an idea for the Delta II where they would have the P-pods attached to the side that would be able to deploy the CubeSats in such a way so that it wouldn't interfere with the primary payload. And then for the C adapter platforms, they would be able to have more P-pods on these different platforms on this ring that would go in between the Centaur and the upper stage. And then the other version that they've tested already is their aft bulkhead carrier that would also help to be able to achieve that goal. And in that footage we saw earlier was an actual test of that aft bulkhead carrier. Not even a test, it was already an operational mission to be able to include this on the bottom of the engine stage of the Centaur upper stage. So this is a really, really cool plan that United Launch Alliance has, and I'm very happy that they're going to be doing this, and this might be a very cheap way for a lot of different industry, whether it be university or government programs, to get small satellites into orbit. So this is a very cool idea, and hopefully this goes very well, and I hope that they do more than just 2 launches of 6 free CubeSats for universities on each launch. That would be great if they do that from here on for as long as they're flying the Atlas V rocket. So very cool news coming out of United Launch Alliance. But
so
now
Mike,
I'm going to pass it back.
Before you pass it back, we have a question from Citizen 80268. I know it's awkward because of the delay,
Yeah,
right?
sorry.
So I have to step on him slightly, just a little bit. Citizen 80268 says, I wonder if this is for U.S. universities or if it's open to universities worldwide.
That's a very interesting question. As of right now, they haven't really said one way or another if it's only for US or if it's open worldwide. But as of right now, the universities that they've been talking to have been in the United States. They've already given away 1 free ride to, I believe, the University of Colorado, and that will be on an upcoming launch. That hasn't happened just yet. So right now, I believe they're talking to United States companies, but I'll find some of the links for this and post it on the different Tomorrow social media so that you can get more information on how a university would apply and if it's restricted only to the United States or if it's international. So.
Also, I think I want you to make a space pod in the form of a used car salesman commercial for the free rides, right? He was doing it. He's getting super excited. I was thinking to myself, man, this feels a little bit like a used car salesman.
Free rides, that's right, I said free. For the low, low price of nothing.
Are you a university student looking for a free ride?
How much would you pay for a ride to space?
I'll bring the hammer down.
All right, thank you, Space Mike. Let's go ahead and send it on over to Carrie Ann for some other really great things happening in space.
In space. How weird. It's like we have a topic here or something.
Who knew?
Oh, goodness.
Almost like I organized the show, but don't worry, I totally didn't.
Oh, goodness. So NASA made some small announcements, I suppose. The NASA Space Technology Missions Directorate announced a program focusing on what they are calling tipping point technologies, which involve CubeSats, which I think is why you put me right after that. There you go. All right.
What?
So there,
My goodness.
This particular project is called Acronaut, and it's about creating the first system for 3D printing and assembling large structures in space without the need for astronaut extravehicular activity, or EVAs, which is that's a huge deal. So they're starting off with small things like CubeSats, et cetera, and being able to 3D print some things like that. Jason Dunn and our friends over at Made in Space have done a lot of work with this, and they have been chosen to do this project Acronaut. It's so hard for me to say. With Northrop Grumman and the Oceaneering Space Systems companies.
So we're building much bigger things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, things that you can't naturally launch.
Because right now we're only building like wrenches and little itty bitty things like this big, right?
Useful tools.
Spare
yeah,
parts.
exactly.
But now we're going to build like full on like satellites or CubeSats.
Right. Things along the lines of large antennas, base stations, that sort of thing. So yeah, stuff that you wouldn't normally launch up into space because we don't have a space shuttle. So, teaming with Northrop Grumman and Oceaneering Space Systems, Northrop Grumman is going to take care of the electronic interfaces and external thermal control systems, while Oceaneering Space Systems, which I think is just such a hilarious name, and I also typed in Oceanic the first couple times I wrote it.
Oceanic Air?
For those of you who watched Lost, the Oceaneering Space Systems is going to take care of designing and building the manipulator arm to kind of 3D print things and build it in space without astronauts having to do it, or at least not having to go outside and do it.
Oh, this is a critical thing for humans exploring the galaxy, right? We
Yeah.
can't bring everything from Earth with us. We're going to have to be able to 3D print these things.
Yeah. Yep.
Or make them. It doesn't have to be 3D printed, but we have to make them somehow.
Exactly.
So, yeah, this is a big deal.
Something out of nothing, as it were.
Baby steps.
Exactly, and it's a really nice combination of private space sector and public space sector kind of coming together and doing
Singing.
it. Yeah,
Singing.
kumbaya.
Linking arms.
Exactly.
I do have a question about this. Is it the acronaut or is it archanaut, like architect?
What was I saying? I believe it's like architect. Archanaut.
Archanaut.
Instead of acronaut? I suppose.
Yeah.
Yes, archanaut.
Archanaut?
Thank you.
And Archanaut
No,
would
it's
be like an
archanaut.
acronym space not?
An acronym not?
Acronym not? Ooh, that hurt
gotta
my
work
brain.
on that.
Ooh. On that note, let's pass it back to
Yay.
Jared.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about something that's been happening for a long time that is finally,
And sucking up the funds of NASA, just absorbing them.
finally, this is going to be happening. The James Webb Space Telescope, the primary mirror is getting ready to be installed.
The thing's freaking huge.
It is gigantic.
Yeah.
Hubble is 2.4 meters, so which is
Go
good,
to
good
the
size.
picture first instead of the video.
Yeah, let's see
'Cause
the
I
picture.
I think the picture gives you a good sense of scale.
This is just a part of the segment. Let's
Yeah.
take a look at that picture.
I didn't realize when I was sizing this that there's a dude in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are 6 of the 18. So that is 1/3 of your primary mirror of James Webb right there.
Freaking
So
huge.
it's 6.5 meters. It's over 2 times.
How many football fields is that?
How many football fields is that?
Three-quarters.
Probably like 1/40th football
There you
fields, roughly. There's going to be 18 of these mirror segments, and they're all hexagonal in shape. They're made of beryllium, and then they're coated with gold. And you put gold on them because that reflects the most light, and that also helps you handle the temperatures that we're going to have all of the equipment at as well. Now, those temperatures, as I was mentioning, the optical systems, including the telescope itself, will operate at about 50 Kelvin, or roughly minus 220 degrees Celsius. Now, one of the cool things to me about James Webb is that they literally have to fold it up in order to fit it into the payload fairing of its launcher, the Ariane 5. So we've got the footage right now showing what the deployment is going to be like, and it's going to do this while it's on its way to L2, Lagrangian point 2, which is about 1.6 million kilometers away from the Earth. It's been designed with servicing in mind, but it's not expected because everything must deploy perfectly, and there is a lot that has to go right in deployment. Like right now, it's showing you the sunshade, which is going to block the sunlight, so that way you can have instruments at minus 220 degrees Celsius. Now, the telescope, they actually tested the unfolding of the mirror just this month. They did it twice, and it performed it perfectly. So it looks like the engineering so far is all starting to translate into it working correctly. And of course, there is James Webb, where it will be way, way far away from the Earth. That way it doesn't have to deal with the excess radiation. Now, it's designed to see further than Hubble can see right now. And Hubble's going back about 13.2 billion light years to just a couple 100 million years after the beginning of our universe. So James Webb is going to be looking a little bit further back because it's looking primarily in infrared light. So as that light gets stretched and a bit more red-shifted, it will tend to go towards infrared light. And that is why James Webb has chosen to be an infrared telescope primarily, as opposed to something like optical and ultraviolet like you had with the Hubble Space Telescope. It's going to be launching on an Ariane 5 in October of 2018. Hopefully.
Finally.
But so far it is on track.
Do you remember its original estimated launch date?
Its original estimated launch date was 2001 because this project was started in 1996. It was only going to cost $500 million, and it's now currently going to be launching 22 years after its inception at just cost capped right at about $8 billion.
Oh my God.
The problem with all of this is that all the technology they had to develop for James Webb, they had to make it. They didn't have the technology at that time. Almost every single part on James Webb is something that the technology had to catch up to actually do. So that's where a lot of your money was spent. R&D actually making this possible.
Making the things to make the things?
Exactly.
Nice.
Cool. Oh, I just interrupted. Was that...
That's it.
All right, cool.
We're good. Yeah, we're good.
Everyone was like, awkward silence.
Yeah.
All right, let's hand it back to Mike. Let's awkwardly hand it back to Mike and speak to us.
Well, instead of things that are taking a really long time to progress, something that is actually progressing rather quickly is Boeing's CST-100 capsule. And with this, they have released a quarterly progress report of where they are at this point in 2015 and what the plan is moving forward for 2016 and 17 up to the first crewed flight of the CST-100 Starliner. And so far, they've already tested lots of the different components of the vehicle, but they actually haven't tested a full mock-up of the vehicle. They've had several mock-ups that they've used for parachute tests and splashdown tests and similar tests like that. But instead of actually having the first structural test article and qualification vehicle that would do all of the actual testing when it's fully integrated, that will begin next year in 2016. Of the different tests that they're going to be doing for this progress, they have about they've already been doing lots of different testing in wind tunnels as well as hardware and software integration, and they've been doing lots of different shock, vibration, thermal, and vacuum tests on these different components. But they're going to be doing a lot of these tests on the structural test article, which already has arrived at Cape Canaveral, and they're already doing lots of different qualification testing there. They transformed the old orbiter processing facility number 3 into their commercial crew processing facility. And this is where they're going to be building, testing, and integrating the capsule and the service module. Next year, right here, we're seeing the actual structural test article that is going to be going through a lot of the different testing before they have the first version that would actually fly into space. And right now, they are they're communicating a lot with NASA so that they can be kept up to date on any changes that NASA may want of Boeing and this vehicle, and that they can test those out and integrate these different things as the progress, as this whole program continues. And they also have been doing a lot of different work on the new crew access tower at the Launch Complex 41 at Cape Canaveral. And they've been doing the work in between Atlas V launches. And you can see right here, this was the most recent launch, actually in October, where you can see that the progress on that crew access tower there on the left is progressing pretty well and is nearing completion. So that's very cool. The other things that they have been doing is this year they have performed 39 tests, different performance tests. And next year they're going to be doing a lot of different tests on that structural test article. And all of this will lead up to, oh, by the way, the structural test article is also going to be the vehicle that they will use for the first pad abort test. And that will occur hopefully in late 2016, possibly early 2017. And then the first uncrewed test flight of this CST-100 will hopefully take place in April of 2017. And that will launch on an Atlas V rocket in the 422 configuration, which, if it had a payload fairing, would be the 4-meter payload fairing. And would also have 2 solid rocket boosters on this mission. So that's a little interesting for that. And also, it's going to be the first time on an Atlas V rocket that they would be using the dual engine version of the Centaur upper stage. So hopefully everything goes well with that on the first uncrewed test flight. And then they're hoping that if everything goes well, they will be able to do the first crewed test flight of the CST-100 in summer of 2017. Right now, that's currently on the books for July of 2017. So hopefully everything goes well. And as far as the publicly available information, they are progressing as close to being on schedule as they possibly can. So things are going well there for Boeing, and I'm going to pass it back over to you guys for some possible really cool news for some unmanned tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrie Ann, take it away.
Yay! So, Spaceport America is actually doing something.
They do a lot of stuff. We had a story last week with them doing
No, I just feel like they don't do enough stuff, and they're not doing the things that I want them to do.
You want them to fly Virgin Galactic.
I want them to fly, yes, big things.
They can't do that yet.
In the meantime, it's fine. They
6
are,
months.
yeah, right? 6 months out.
6 months.
6 months. 6 months.
In the meantime, they are doing the very first Spaceport America Drone Summit, which is coming up in March of 2016, the 11th through the 13th. Did you just screenshot the timer? Is that what you did?
No, yeah, well, yeah. So that's the only thing really on the page. So if you
That's
place it, wait, no,
hilarious.
but I didn't just screenshot it. Look, it. There
Oh,
you
it
go.
does count. Look
It
at
counts.
you.
Look at that.
That's
Huh?
awesome.
Nice.
I mean, it's technically the wrong time because it's counting from when I did that.
Right.
But whatever.
Ignore that for a moment. This is, of course, Spaceport dronesummit.com. They're expecting over 1,000 attendees over the 3-day conference. They're going to do some small drone racing that's designed to help drone pilots measure their skills in a quantitative way, which I thought was kind of exciting. They're going to have different kinds of obstacles and courses that they can each do. This is, of course, for small drone enthusiasts, but also professionals. Small drones are defined by the FAA as a maximum of 55 pounds at a maximum of 400-foot altitude. The 3 drone races have racetracks, obstacles, and cinematography restyle, which I thought was really cool because it's not then just about how you can maneuver in a theatrical, what am I trying to say, in an obstacle, I suppose, way, but cinematography and freestyle being part as well. They're going to have speakers from both the film and the unmanned aerial vehicle industries, which I thought was also very cool. And that also includes people who want to use drones for wedding photography and wedding videography as well.
That's a great use.
Right, exactly. And then they're also going to do screenings of quote-unquote leading-edge footage of movie shots with drones.
Boring.
I thought that was kind of interesting, though. It's neat. It's very, I don't want to say it's very small, but it's a small grouping, at least at the moment. But all the people who are doing it are very enthusiastic about it and very interested in it. And the professionals who are doing it have a lot of things to say and tips and tricks and all that other fun stuff. So that'll be at Spaceport America, Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Which
in March.
I think actually the story goes to say that I know we all want to see humans leave from Spaceport
Yeah.
America, but it just kind of goes to show that Spaceport America is doing a lot of stuff. They're not just sitting there idle waiting for Virgin Galactic because they have their vertical launch sites, their horizontal launch sites. They're using more of their vertical launch sites right now than, say, their horizontal ones, but then also hosting the drone conference. A lot of really cool things coming out of Spaceport America, I think.
Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good
All
for
right,
them.
we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be asking the question why Atlantis is your favorite orbiter. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. It is your favorite.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled on some expectation, this girl's a fascination. Nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
And welcome back to Tomorrow. Now, before we get started with our main topic this week as to why you love Atlantis the most, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who also love Atlantis the most. These are the people who have contributed $5 or more to this specific episode. You can find more information on how you can help crowdfund the shows of Tomorrow over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, let's go ahead and get started with. So there's a constant argument. The official orbiter space shuttle of the show is Atlantis, and we were talking about Minnie Stoge, one of the SpacePod correspondents, just visited Endeavor. Actually, no, I'm sorry, Endeavor and Atlantis is at least what I saw, and got us to thinking about the space shuttle. How we haven't actually talked about the space shuttle for a while.
Yeah.
Right? And
Because it's not doing
Matt
anything.
from Chasing Atlantis is in the chat room, and he's just thrilled to
Right?
pieces.
Atlantis, all right, chasing Atlantis for the win. And back when the shuttle was flying on the show, we were kind of known as Space Vidcast. We did the live launch coverage, and we always said, Space Shuttle Atlantis is your favorite. And fun little fact: if you call the old Space Vidcast phone number and dial 5, it says, to learn what your favorite orbiter is, press 5. If you hit 5, it will say, your favorite orbiter is Atlantis, and then promptly hang up on you. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It was hilarious.
I wanted to take a moment and see, go around the table and see why Atlantis is absolutely your favorite orbiter. / what is actually your favorite orbiter. So we'll start with you.
So Atlantis is my favorite orbiter because I'm on the show. But in actuality, my real favorite orbiter is Endeavor.
Why?
Because, well, first of all, bias here in Los Angeles. This is where Endeavor is. So also another bias. I was a part of Mission 26, which was that big effort to move Endeavour from LAX to the California Science Center. And Dutta was also a part of it, too. In fact, me and Dutta were actually together on one of the shifts that we worked, which was really cool. And, of course, when you get a selfie with a space shuttle, it's kind of hard not to, like, fall in love with it. But to me, Endeavour... I really like Endeavour because it was born of that spirit that says that just that nothing's going to set us back. And it was
It's a Franken orbiter.
It was approved after the Challenger disaster because we wanted to continue to do the program. It was like, we're not giving up on this. Even though we've had something happen, we're still committed to this, and this is Endeavour rising from the ashes.
I gave you too much time to think about this. That was a really good answer.
Yeah, so just saying. It is a Franken orbiter, too. It's basically all the spare parts from all the other orbiters and structural test assemblies thrown together very haphazardly for $2.2 billion. And you get it's just
Endeavour.
It's beautiful. I love it.
So
it's also still helping too because they just pulled those tanks they pulled water tanks out of Endeavour in August that they're going to send up to the space station.
So do they have a plan at the Science Center to put Endeavour in her final configuration? Because right now she's at wheel stop like Discovery, and I mean it's neat and you can get close to it, but it's not going to be.
Yeah.
One of the really cool things about all the space shuttles around the country is that each one's in a different flight configuration.
All three configurations of flight.
Right. You'll have one at essentially launch, which is Endeavour.
Yes.
You'll have one in space, which is Atlantis. You'll have one at wheel stop, which is Discovery.
Yes.
And then you have one on a ship out at sea.
Yeah, with Enterprise, with the Intrepid
Enterprise.
Museum.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Which is its fourth flight state, not very well known flight state of on a ship out at sea.
Yeah, that's how we transport it from. Okay, no.
Yeah, it did a carrier landing.
Right.
Because it's so easy to do one of those.
Right.
There's a Hollywood movie in there somewhere. You're welcome.
But there you go. That's why Endeavour's my favorite.
Right, Atlantis. Great. So, Mike, why is Atlantis your favorite orbiter?
The reason Atlantis is my favorite orbiter is because it's the only orbiter that I actually got to see launch with my own eyes, and that was STS-135. So that's always going to hold a special place in my heart for actually being able to see one and getting fairly as close as I possibly could and being able to see it pretty well. But the one that's probably my actual favorite orbiter would be Discovery. And Discovery is kind of like a weird thing for a lot of people because Discovery was the one that had the most problems. It was the one that had that would get delayed the most often, and they'd have it on the pad ready to go, and it would be delayed. And then 3 weeks later or a month later, they'd try again, and it'd be delayed. And that just happened so many times with Discovery. But a lot of the missions that Discovery launched were really cool, and there was a lot of really cool ideas that did get implemented on Discovery. So I really like the Discovery orbiter, but Atlantis, that's why Atlantis is my favorite, because I actually got to see it. So.
Interesting fact. Wait, were you at STS-135?
No, I actually never got to see a shuttle launch, unfortunately.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
We'll rub that in later.
That's okay.
So, as Mini Stowage brings up in the chat room, Dutta.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, Dutta, were you, I know you don't have a microphone, but just nod yes or no. Were you ever at a space shuttle launch? Which one did you get to see? You got to...
Yeah. I drove to 133, but
Drove to... And then
I did it in November, not February.
Oh, yeah, 133
Just
had
too
the
soon, man. Too soon.
umbilical problem, yeah.
It's always going to be too soon.
So the space shuttle, all the space shuttles had personalities. Discovery, Mike's favorite, was the diva of the fleet and would go when she was good darn well ready.
Yeah.
Yep.
If everything's not just perfect, I'm not going to go.
I'm just going to ruin this
gonna
ground
stay here.
umbilical right now.
I'm just going to stay here for a while.
That's
I don't
what you
want to
get.
go right now. I'm not feeling it. It's just the sky, the sun, it's not on my good side. We'll wait a few months. Constantly, that was Discovery. Endeavour was the baby of the fleet and just kind of whiny. Atlantis, of course, the workhorse and everyone's favorite. All right, let's go ahead. But my point, so Mini Stowage brought up that Mini Stowage, Mike, Carrion, and myself were all at STS-135, like down there watching STS-135, which was the last shuttle launch. And I've been saying STS, excuse me, that stands for Space Transportation System, and was the official titles given to all the missions for the space shuttle itself. And in the chat room, I'm curious, how many of you were down at STS-135 as well? I know at least Vax was there. I'm sure there were a few others that were there. I mean, the media site was packed and everything else was packed.
Packed.
What's your favorite orbiter?
So, to be a little bit controversial,
Don't you dare say they all look the same.
Don't you?
Don't do it.
Don't.
I have said in the past that all the orbiters look the same, and so I can't tell the difference, and so therefore it might as well be Atlantis because Ben told me so. As Kitty has mentioned, she said it's got to be Atlantis because she doesn't know any better. So it's a similar vein. I kind of have to choose Atlantis for similar reasons to Mike, which is that I am fortunate enough to have seen all three birds fly, but all three of the remaining birds fly. But I did see Atlantis fly more than once, and so she holds a special place in my heart simply because of that. Discovery, there was a lot of effort put into trying to watch that one particular Discovery launch that I got to see.
Oh my God, STS-133.
Yeah, STS-133.
We went down to Florida so many times, I can't even tell you.
The
Yeah.
never-ending scrub.
The
never-ending
never-ending scrub,
scrub.
for sure. The never-ending NASA social, however you want to word it. For those of you, us, that were there for multiple times trying to see Discovery fly, there was a lot of effort put into it. Even though we didn't have a direct effect necessarily on whether or not she was going to launch, we all felt like we did at some point. There were rituals that came out of it. But there were also a lot of really great friendships that remain to this day. It was a huge bonding experience. Even Space Kate came over from the UK, from England, and stayed. She was there for just the original NASA social in November, and then stayed in our country, just sort of couch surfing around and getting to know other space tweeps and seeing other space things and attending Space Up and all that kind of stuff, and then was able to finally watch her fly.
What is it about the Space Shuttle that brings that out, right? So there are NASA socials for Falcon launches and Atlas launches
Sure.
and Delta launches. I mean, all these different rockets. But it was the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle socials, even not necessarily the very,
Sure,
very
well,
last ones.
there's-
It was those. When you look at the crowds, everyone goes to the Space Shuttle launches. What is it about shuttle?
There's a couple of things, a couple of
was it?
factors I think that sort of play into that. First of all, humans.
Yes.
Okay.
Right?
People.
Getting to see a manned rocket or manned spaceship fly.
Crewed. Yeah.
Crude, yes, I apologize. Is totally different than watching a satellite go, unless you have something directly tied to that particular satellite or that experiment or anything along those lines. I worked on that. I touched it. Is a different feeling than I don't know. It's pretty. At the same time, it's also been around for so long. Right?
It's
We-
well
what-
known.
but
Very
so
well known.
It's actually sort of a cultural icon.
Yes.
And it's something that really represents something to people as well. It's almost like the spirit of exploration embodied in itself. And I mean, it didn't really explore, if you will. It didn't.
Sure.
It didn't like leave low Earth orbit, but it was still something that people could look at and.
So what happens when Space Launch System starts to fly? What happens when Crew Dragon starts to fly? What happens when Orion starts to fly? Will we have that same response to those vehicles as we did Shuttle?
I think especially with like Dragon and Starliner, simply because they're both private and nobody's really ever put people on a private spacecraft before into space, like to actually go to a predetermined destination and perform a task. So I think for those two especially, it'll be really hyped up and something that maybe a lot of people will tune into to see it happen. I don't know about SLS because first of all, it hasn't happened. And then secondly, I just don't know. It's going to be a tough one to say with that.
Not to mention that the shuttle came from a long legacy already that was established, you know what I'm saying? Like, while SpaceX has a bit of a history, whatever it is, 12, 13 years, et cetera, and Boeing obviously has a history, Shuttle already had that history when they were starting. NASA had already flown humans, and this sort of felt like a continuation thereof. There was a lot of hope and promise right at the very beginning, in 82, right? And it already had since, 62? Already had this sort of history behind it.
Very long history.
Right. So, I mean, it's sort of like saying they have a built-in audience, I guess, to a certain extent, that these other companies may or may not already have. There's always the fanboys for sure, but that doesn't that doesn't
It was
mean...
like watching the mythology finally pay
Yeah.
off. I mean, I guess that's why I always get so excited about James Webb, because it's, I mean, James Webb was
The mythology of James Webb Space Telescope.
James Webb started when I was in 2nd grade, and it's now finally happening, and I'm so
Right.
excited about that
Right.
because
No,
I've
I
been
feel
anticipating
old.
this. So
Thanks. I feel old now. Thanks for that. we've been stepping. We've been going back and forth. They haven't given Mike a chance to say anything. Do you have any?
Well, I agree with your guys' point about the commercial spacecraft that probably won't reach that sort of level of popularity or attention until they actually do something. And like for SpaceX, a lot of people, at least in the space industry, who have like an inkling of an idea of what's going on in space right now, have at least heard of SpaceX. But that didn't happen until, Falcon 9 started launching. No one had heard of them when they were trying to do Falcon 1, at least in a general sense. And, a lot more people started hearing about them once they got the Dragon to the ISS for the first time. And I think that once these vehicles start doing things, that it will have the potential to reach the same sort of popularity as the Space Shuttle. And I think the same thing applies to the Space Launch System. If the Space Launch System only flies 1 or 2 times and then is canceled for something else, the next generation of space geeks, it's not going to have a special place in their heart. It's going to be something that they're going to read about one day as like a side note of like, NASA tried to make a really big rocket called the Space Launch System one time. Next, and so I think that once it does things, once we start sending stuff, to the moon, to asteroids, to Mars, then the Space Launch System could have that same sort of meaning. At least in a way, the SLS and Orion could have that same sort of meaning to the next generation as the Space Shuttle did to all of us. Because we all grew up with the Space Shuttle, including, no matter which age you are in this group here, we all grew up with the Space Shuttle. And that's something that's going to hold a special place for us. And it's interesting because, like, for my parents' generation, they grew up with Apollo. And shuttle is cool to them, but it doesn't hold the same meaning to them that Apollo did. And I think the same thing will apply like for each next big thing that NASA does in the human spaceflight realm.
So Matt from Chasing Atlantis in the chat room said Atlantis' final launch, and he got the apostrophe correct in that, which good for him. Inspired me to reconnect with a childhood passion, leading us on this incredible journey and project. In that sense, Atlantis has become more than a spaceship, but an icon of the most important things in my life: exploration and connection with cool folks like you guys. It's all also main shuttle in Hubble 3D IMAX movie saved Hubble. You're welcome. An only launch I saw in person. Huzzah for space! Huzzah for space! So yeah. Also, if you haven't seen the if you've never seen a shuttle launch, the next best thing you can do is watch those IMAX movies.
Yeah.
Because oh my gosh, they get it as close as you can. The audio is really close. It's
really
not
good.
Quite right. It's really
But
close.
really,
though.
really close.
Yeah, so there you go. All right, now before we go to break, I'll give you, for those who have not heard the story yet, we made Atlantis the official orbiter of the show many moons ago. And have I told this in an actual real show? Have I
not
only
sure.
done it in After Dark? The reason I chose Atlantis wasn't because of any special mission that she did. It wasn't because it was the first orbiter that I saw, because I don't think it actually was. At least fly.
Right.
There was no ultimate reason to choose Atlantis, except that no one else was choosing Atlantis. Everyone would choose Discovery for some reason, right? Discovery returned to flight. Or you choose Endeavour. Endeavour was the baby of the fleet. It was the new one. It was the Frankenstein. It was built from the dreams, the dream continuing, right? So you choose Endeavour. What am I missing? I'm missing. And then
And
Atlantis.
Columbia and Challenger, there were people always had these different connections to all of these other orbiters, and for some reason, no one was a fan of Atlantis.
Not no one, but it was such a small group.
It was such a small group.
So
it was
I decided,
hilarious.
you know what? No, we're going to make Atlantis the orbiter of the show, and we have been promoting Atlantis ever since. For years we've been doing this, Mike.
By the way, are we only talking NASA orbiters here? Because if we're talking worldwide, then I'm changing my answer to Buron. Buron is my favorite.
I never qualified it. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, comments. Actually, Buron that is a show in and of itself. That was an incredible machine that flew once. Never crewed. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, comments from our last show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the show. Now, before we get started with our comments from our last show, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of tomorrow to help to make this specific segment to this episode happen. These are the people who contributed $2.50 or more to this show. By contributing $2.50 or more per episode, you also get access to After Dark right away. And oh my goodness, this is going to be a fun After Dark. I think we're going to have to put the segments from the middle, like in between the breaks, into After Dark because it was just that awesome. Worth it this week.
Yes.
Worth it this week. But there's more. We are crowdfunded, like I said, and any dollar value helps us continue to do this. So even 1 penny helps contribute to the show, and that gets you your name in the show for as little as 1 penny per show, or no more than 4 cents US pennies per month. You get your name inside of the show itself. And huge thank you to everyone who contributes to the show week after week. You can find more information on how you can help contribute over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, let's go ahead and get started with comments from our last show. Actually, I can say last week's show this time, can't I?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, last week's show. So,
Finally.
all right. Comment Lord.
Oh man, this one comes from Green Jimil.
Green
Jim 2?
Green Jim 2.
The second?
Green Jim II.
We're going to go with that. Off of Reddit said, as I said over on YouTube comments for me, it's MCT/BFR/Raptor, which would stand for Martian Colonial Transport, Big Effing Rocket /Raptor.
No. You get around BFR by saying Big Falcon Rocket.
Big Falcon Rocket.
That's something I learned from Gwen Shotwell.
Yes.
Big Falcon Rocket.
Yeah, and it's Mars Colonial Transporter.
What did I say?
Martian.
Oh.
It's Mars Colonial Transporter.
I apparently have no idea what any of these acronyms mean, which is why we're trying to spell them out. And I'm surprised nobody else has mentioned that. The nearest seemed to be Space Mike with our quote-unquote space cruiser idea, more like Space Ferry, unless you're going some serious armament on board.
Well, you could kind of throw a
course.
Space Launch System in there as well, right? I mean, they're kind of in the same classification, Space Launch System, and I don't think we have information on the Mars Colonial Transporter yet, but it seems like they're both Saturn-class vehicles.
Yeah, definitely heavy lifters. So
Super heavy lifters, I think, yeah.
All right. Fred M. Ratz? Fred M.
Rats.
I love screen names. Also off of Reddit, I keep seeing implied the BE-4 engines would need to be refurbished like the SSME, Space Shuttle Main Engine. I know that one. But are you meaning to say that the problem is to the attach points of thrust and propellant rather than the internal issues of the BE-4 itself?
I don't think I ever meant to imply that the BE-4 engines, which is the Blue Origin Engine 4, I believe is what that means, would have refurbishment issues. Ultimately, I don't know, so I'm not trying to imply anything. I have no idea what refurbishment of a BE-4 looks like, if it's going to be refurbishable or reusable, rapidly reusable. I have no data whatsoever, right?
Nobody knows,
No
frankly.
one knows. So I can't comment on it. I can't even begin to think about it because there's literally nothing to go off of there. But I don't think it's really that part of it. It's the ejecting the core, so you're no longer attached to your fuel tank. And so you need to build a new tank, and you're going to have to requalify all of that plumbing that goes into it again. So it's a much more complex procedure to do that, potentially, than to just land the whole thing and fuel it back up and send it back out. So using that same analogy that we've used with the airplane, imagine you fly an airplane. Now, instead of throwing the whole airplane away, you don't do that. You take the jet engines and you save those, but you throw the rest of the airplane away. That is United Launch Alliance's plan. And that's why we're kind of like, well, I mean, it's not reusable, right? Yeah, there's a lot of money that goes into propulsion, the power plant, but it's not the same as just, fueling it back up and launching it off. There's a difference between refurbishable, reusable, and rapid reusable. And I think we don't make enough distinction between reusable and rapid reusable enough on the show, and it needs to be rapid reusability in order to get the cost of spaceflight down. If you don't do that, then it's just like everything we've done in space before. By the way, there's no guarantee SpaceX will do it either.
yeah, I was about to say that there's lots of problems in either way you go with it.
Absolutely. We don't actually know, and I'm curious to see what the future brings.
All right. Streetwind, also off of Reddit, says, my, quote, most exciting technology, end quote, unfortunately doesn't exist yet. We currently have a lurking issue with space exploration, and that's power production. We developed dozens of high-powered electric engines that can do far more than what Dawn is contending for with today, but they all just got shelved because there's no power solution to drive them.
Jared, you were nodding and thumbs upping during that. What do you?
Yeah, that's a really big systems issue when we're designing spacecraft, is that obviously instruments and ion engines and other things like that take a lot of power to use. And I think actually in that comment from Streetwind that I read on Reddit, they were talking about how certain instruments on New Horizons were used at certain times simply because that was the total amount of power that they could use, simply because of the amount of power that New Horizons is running off of. So yeah, that's a really big thing, and that is a really great point, which is that we need to figure out how to make power work for a lot of these.
Speaking of power.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Control room's
just
still
lost
up,
power.
right?
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
All right. So this one comes from...
Bye, Mike. So anytime we bring up Mike, just go to him directly. Mike, you're still there, so all right.
Oh, you guys still see me?
Oh yeah, we can still see
Well,
you. We're
off
good.
camera.
We just lost this section of our set.
Awesome.
We need like a line art of Mike in the background.
Oh, we
Does
do.
someone draw on the
Real
TV?
quick drawing.
That would be hilarious.
I don't know what he's doing right now. Go to his camera. What?
Stuff and things.
He's doing stuff and things.
This.
Leave the poor man alone. Goodness.
All right. Let's move on.
All right, so Megastrain off of Reddit says, anything that offers more than needing a reactant and an oxidizer on board to launch into space. Well, I'm always hopeful that NERVA or nuclear thermal rocket, NTR, will be looking at seriously the reaction engine using an oxidizer from an outside air, or what Escape Dynamics is doing gives me some hope in this space.
Nah, Space
Probably
Mike-
pun intended. I'm
Space
guessing.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reaction engine actually does bring liquid oxygen with it, does it not? It brings its oxidizer.
It does, but it's not going to use that oxidizer during the initial part of flight. That's what the whole thing is, so that they would be able to use it as an air-breathing engine, collect the oxidizer from the air, and use that until they get to the point where the engine would shut off because there isn't enough air to process into enough oxidizer to burn your fuel. So the stuff that they're carrying with them would be used once they reach that stage of flight, and then would be used to power the engines from that point to whatever orbits they're planning on going to. And then once they are re-entering the atmosphere, once they reach a certain level of the atmosphere and need to restart the engines again, then it would go back to being an air-breathing engine instead of just a liquid rocket engine. So that's what makes it such a big deal.
Well, and we keep using the term oxidizer, and we've used it throughout the show because we just assume everyone knows what it means. But in case you don't, you need oxygen for fire, and rocket fire is fire, and an oxidizer literally is oxygen. You are bringing our oxygen with us, and the oxygen, the air that you breathe, is not dense enough to put on a rocket. And so you have your different chemicals or your different states of matter. You've got solid, liquid, gas, and the fourth, which is awesome, is plasma, but that doesn't apply here. So when you take oxygen and you essentially slow it down, you make it really, 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 really cold, it turns into a liquid. And the colder you can make it, the more of it you can fit into a rocket tank. And that's what we do. We take oxygen, we make it really cold, it turns into a liquid, stick it on a rocket tank. That's why the rocket tank starts to freeze. And then we use that to feed oxygen into the fire because there's no oxygen in space. And that's why it's called an oxidizer. That's what's going on. Yeah. So there you go. In case anyone didn't know, now you're welcome.
More efficient as well to add it while you're in atmosphere as well. So.
Well, yeah, and actually that's... So I'm wondering about the efficiency of that, because when you're using the reaction engine on the Skylon... So reaction engines go on the Skylon spacecraft? Spacecraft.
Yes, yeah.
Spacecraft, right?
Specifically the Sabre engines you're talking about.
Oh, you're right. The Sabre engine. What am I... Wait.
Reaction engines is the company.
Right, okay.
Sabre engines are the air-breathing / liquid rocket engines that we're talking about.
Okay, cool. No, we lost the power, so his mic isn't going to work. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just lean like this whenever you need to speak.
Sure.
There, great. Just awkward. So the Sabre engine, the reaction engine, Sabre engine goes on the thing, but you're bringing your liquid oxygen with you, and you're lifting that, and so you're burning fuel to do that, right? And now your vehicle's super heavy because you've got all this oxidizer with you. I'm wondering what the trade-offs of inefficiency are. I don't know that any of us have that answer. It's just a question I'm posing of like, okay, does it actually make sense to do that, or does it make sense to start burning that right away? I don't know. All right, moving right along.
All right, this one comes from Kurt Stolpa off of Facebook.
Also, best picture icon or PyCon ever. Love it.
This is really good.
Yep, I'm loving the new Muppets when they came back. I think they're great. Yep, okay.
Okay, that derails the show.
You're welcome.
Many near-term items, such as Bigelow B330 module in orbit, getting the Vasmir drive up to the ISS for testing, successful Dream Chaser flight and orbital testing, completion of Dr. Broussard's WB series, Polywell, and fusion device testing.
Yeah, so ISS for International Space Station, and then the Polywell fusion reactor, which is, we're talking about power. So yet another power generation technique, although that's for, I thought the Polywell reactors were for Earth. Are they for space?
I don't know if they've been thought about putting them in space.
I thought they were Earthbound. I'm not sure if there's any... Yeah, okay, cool, yeah.
Nobody
there you
knows.
go. And that's in reference to last week's show, which is what are the things you're most excited about coming up in the quasi-near-term future.
Course.
All right, next up.
And then John Burstead, also off of Facebook, says, first successful landing of an F9 or Falcon 9 first stage. First commercial crew flight, either Dragon 2 or Starliner. The use of Dragon 2 for Mars sample return mission, Red Dragon. And landing on Europa, both unmanned.
So why does everyone get to think they get to pick multiple things? I should have been more specific. You got to pick the one thing.
You didn't say one thing. That's why
didn't.
everyone thinks that they can pick multiple things. You said, what technology are you excited about? And people were like, I like this, 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 and this.
Everything.
Yeah, everything. Is everything not a choice? Aren't you the one who said, when given a choice, pick both? Well, then, man, things I can't say to you.
All right, that's the show for this week. I'd like to thank everyone so much for joining us. There will not be a live show next week. We will return December 5th with special guest William Pomerantz of Virgin Galactic fame. He'll be in studio to talk about what they're doing. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. If you're watching live, After Dark is up next. If you're a Patreon Plus subscriber, that will be available immediately as soon as it's available online, at least for you. For everyone else, that's available in about 4 weeks. Thank you so much. See you in 2 weeks.